Alrighty, everybody. So we're gonna get into probably a bit of a longer video because we're going to get the into C sharp just a little bit, specifically C sharp when it comes to Unity. So if you like, I believe most of what we're going to cover really kind of like is used across the board, whether you're in C sharp in Unity or outside of Unity. But there are a couple things that may be a little bit different if you take this outside of the Unity ecosystem. I'm going to go ahead and just open up this script right here that I made. So obviously, this entire thing is a script, right? Um, C Sharp and most programming languages is a compilation of all these kinds of different bits of code that work together to make a thing happen, right? I'm going to zoom in just a bit. So I'm gonna first things first go and go over the structure of how code like sits in our editor, what the different parts mean, then go into variables, different types of variables, functions, parameters, and a big like just Unity things, right? So the very end is where we're gonna get into some of the very specific Unity things here. Um, to start out, let's just start from the bottom or from the top and go to the bottom. This up here is actually before that, I'm not the best when it comes to vocabulary. I'll be completely transparent on there. I care more about telling you guys what something does rather than what its perfect name is or what people call it. So these usings up here are the different libraries that this script in particular are using. And you see some of them are grayed out. So I'm going to go ahead and delete them because that actually means they're not being used. Come on. Well, didn't want to double click it. Right? So really the only one that's being used at the moment is this using Unity engine. Okay? And that basically gives us, I believe, if I remember correctly, access to a mono behavior and the different functions that we have access to. And I apologize ahead of time if you hear my dog in the background. Yeah, so if we go ahead and delete all of this, this is what a C sharp script just in general. You know what? I'm going to pause the recording real quick and go see what she's barking at. Dog acquired. Hopefully she'll be a little bit calmer now. Getting rid of that mono behavior gobbledygook and getting rid of the little bit of code that I had in here. Actually, let's just get rid of all of it. This is a script, right? This is just a base class. It doesn't do anything. It's just a piece of data, just a container. Okay? Now I'm going to start undoing things to bring things back. If I go ahead and here, hold on, I'm going to do this a little bit out of order. Let's delete this. Mono behavior is what Unity really is built off of, all the code. It's basically another script. Actually, if we press F12 on it, it's going to take probably a hot second. It is a very large script full of stuff that makes Unity do its thing. It makes it work. Okay? Now, what we're seeing here is called inheritance. So basically, my script is a mono behavior, and mono behavior is if we scroll up to the top, a behavior. And if we F12 on behavior, behavior is a component. Component is an object. Object is kind of like the root of all things, right? It doesn't inherit from anything. That's what we call inheritance. Okay. We're not going to get into that too much on this video because it's not really required for this base level of just build a simple game, but it is something that you'll be using as you go forward. Um, Using Unity Engine, taking it back a step up, allows us, if I delete this, to use mono behavior. All right, it's importing this library. Basically, these lines up here above our classes are some of the very first things that get like evaluated and checked before anything in here gets made. All right. Now, mono behavior has a whole bunch of things that we've probably already seen a bit of. It has start. It has update. It has come on, out of there. It has fixed update, and it also has all these things that we know, like public game object, game object. Let's just name this go, and then public transform. It's what lets us use a transform, right? Um, all this good stuff here. Uh, so this is really what enables Unity to be so easily usable. Um, and whatnot. Uh, Now, the class itself, we're saying this is a public class called MyScript. Make sure you're going to go back. I'm going to save this real quick. And I'm going to make another script just to kind of like make this clear. Um, and let's call it no, let's just call it player controller. We're not actually going to build a player controller here just yet, but we're just going to name it player controller. And you know what? Just for the sake of giving things concrete examples, I'm going to delete my script and I'm going to say, I don't know, player health tracker, right? Okay. So now we have two things. It gives us a little bit of a more concrete example, right? Because we have two scripts. Obviously, the player controller is going to be reading our inputs, and player health tracker, I'll even put them side by side, is going to keep track of our health. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and actually comment this and say this is something that you should get in the habit of doing, and say this is the script that will control our players' inputs, or will control our player based off user inputs. There we go. And actually, I'm going to just take this for the sake of making things look a little bit cleaner. Easy peasy. And I'm going to just copy the same thing, put it over here. This is a script that will keep track of our players' health. And we'll just get rid of that. Deleted too much. There you go. So, now, because these classes are public, we know when things are public that the idea behind public is that anything in this, anything that has access to it can, uh, uh, or anything that has been given a direct reference to it can go ahead and access it and use it and all that good stuff. So, for example, let's say that the player controller also made it so when your health is 0, your player couldn't move. So let's go ahead and make public int health. And if the int and all that stuff isn't making sense just yet, don't worry. We're going to get into variables. But let's just make this is a simple variable over in our health tracker, right? What we can do is, and actually this is a good segue into variables. So actually let's take a step back. Public int health right here is a public variable. The type of variable it is an integer, which if you remember from math class is just a number, right? It's a whole number. And it's named health. Now, it's very important that we capitalize the H in health when we're doing a public variable. If this was a private variable, then even when then we would have it be lowercase. And now let's for a moment change this variable name to player health. This is what we call Pascal case. I'm going to just actually bring this over here and go back here. This is what we call, this is what we call camel case. Now, if I make a public int, and I'm just going to name this player's current health, this is what we call Pascal case. For my students, if you don't do this correctly, you lose 5 points after I find 5 errors. Private variables, and I'm actually going to show you another way of writing this, which is absolutely okay. Player health without what's that word called? Without, I'm just gonna say without private. Okay. These two basically mean the same thing. The default, if you don't have public or private, it defaults to private. So these two guys here are essentially the same deal. Okay, they both are an int. They both are private, even though this one doesn't say private. So they both get camel case. Now the int doesn't change whether it's camel case or not. Okay, and actually, let's take it a step further up. Your class names should always, regardless on if they're public or private, but most of the time your classes are going to be public, they should always be Pascal case. Okay. Now, Pascal case again, whenever something's public, also whenever you have just a class name. Okay. Um, Now, I'm just going to delete these two because I just want to get into the casing rules there. Public in general means, what does public and private mean? Public means anything can access it from outside of the script as long as it has reference to the object that the script is attached to, or the object that this script is. Because remember, when we went through the inheritance, if we follow mono behavior all the way up, this is an object on its own. Now, it's not a game object like we see in Unity, but it's like a code object. If we want to get like metaphorical here, if you think of like a concrete thought, that's what this script is, as opposed to if I think orange or if I think player health tracker. Let's just talk about that. I was going to use fruit, but we'll just use the what we actually have here. If I think about player health tracker and I have like a code version of it, that's an object. Now I can also add player health tracker to a game object, and then it becomes both a game object and an object. It's a little bit of a weird thing to wrap your head around, but you don't always need to have scripts like this attached to a game object in order to be able to use it. We'll get into that at a later date, but for right now, just know that player health tracker is an object. It is public, so any other scripts can get a hold of it. And because this is public, any script that does get a hold of it will be able to get this player's current health because it is also public. All right. Now, if this was private, you would not be able to get a hold of it. You wouldn't be able to interact with the player's current health at all. And that has pros and cons, right? Sometimes you want objects to be able to go and manipulate players' current health. So let's say player controller is holding the logic for like when things collide with the player. So when a bad guy hits it, you would go over to the player's health tracker and take away some health, right? But sometimes you don't want any script to be able to go and do that. So you would set it to private, and maybe handle that logic in this player health tracker script instead. It's really up to you. There's no necessary right way or wrong way to do it. It just is kind of up to you on how you keep track of things. For the cases of the rest of this video, we're probably just going to be using public variables because it's a little bit simpler to move things around. But yeah, so I'm going to save this because I want to go back over to player controller, right? It has no variables, but every class is an object. It's its own type, okay? We have all kinds of types. We have public int, and I'm going to just do test int. We have public string. I'm just going to name it test string. We have public float, test float. If I could spell, I'm going to do private bool just to throw things up a little bit. Test bool. Private. Trying to think of another one. These are the most common ones. We have Unity ones that gives us private transform, test transform. So these blue ones up here, they're blue because they specifically are very basic data structures, okay? Transform, on the other hand, is actually another class. If we press F12 on it, we can see it's its own class. It's a component, it has a whole bunch of stuff, but this is something that Unity built, right? So with that logic, we could also do private player, or let me make it public just because I like this to be public more. Player health tracker, and I'm going to say player health tracker instance. That's what I'm going to name it, just because it's a instance of that player health tracker. Now, I'm going to save this, And because it's public, this is another one of the cool things about public variables, is if I come over here and I'm gonna make this square actually from our previous videos. Make it the best color. We're gonna make it green. Let's make it not a gross green though. And I'm gonna make this our player. So if I go player controller, we'll see I have all those public variables I made, but I also have player health tracker, right? Now, obviously, I can change test int to 5, and I can change test float to 3, and I can say test string is unity is cool, but obviously I can't really do anything with this. If I click this little dot, it might give me something, but not in this case. What I need to do is have another object called health, or with the health tracker object. So let's go ahead and add the health tracker script here and just drag this in. So now the player controller has access to the player health tracker script. Now, you don't necessarily need to drag it in. We could make this private. Yep. And do the get component player health tracker. And then set player health tracker instance equal to that. We'll get into this in a little bit, but this would work as well. You don't necessarily have to drag it in then. Now, the thing with this though is, sure, we can access this. Let's make it public again, just so that we can go, and we might lose it here because I made it private and then public. Nope, it's kept on. It held on to it, so good. But what can we actually do with it? Well, we could say that player health tracker instance, because we want the actual name of it, dot player's current health equals 1,000,000 or 1,000, because I'm not going to make that many zeros, every frame and have infinite life. Because this was a public variable, we can go ahead and actually interact with it in other scripts as long as we have that script here. Now, if you watched the coding video, we'll see we're gonna showcase. Oh, I still have this on maximized. We'll see that this gets set to 1,000, and because it's an update, we know update happens every frame. I'll get into that in just a little bit, but I can't change it because it's being reset every frame. Now, if I don't know, delete the square. Oh, whoop, that's actually not what I wanted to do. If I were to remove this, I'm not getting the error I thought I would. Might be because I deleted it and then brought it back. Let's try that one more time, because I'm actually very interested as to why. Interesting. I would have assumed we'd be getting an error because this isn't there, but that's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to show more errors, but I guess that's not gonna happen. That's okay. I'm dragging something around. The big thing here is you can go and access public variables off of stuff. So going after that, let me pull up the list of what I wanted to talk to you guys about. We talked about variables, we talked about types. The core here is that player health tracker. Every script becomes its own type. So you have these default different variables that we have, but then you do also have types there. Now, you can also, I'm going to make a function, okay? Because we have actually two in here. We have void start and void update. Update happens every frame. Start happens immediately when the game starts. So if I were to do this, let's actually take a look at that. Let's make this equal to none. If I hit play, if you look at our code, the first thing I do is say, hey, get the player health component and set it equal to the player health tracker instance. Now, we have player health tracker instance. It doesn't have anything. Get component basically says, go through the list of all these different guys here and find one that's player health tracker. and set our code is saying set it equal to player health tracker instance. So what we should see as soon as I hit start is it immediately gets set there. Okay. Now, update, we already saw it happen in action, right? We had players' current health being set to 1,000 every frame, and because it was happening every frame, we couldn't update it. That's really cool. Those are two really powerful tools we have. However, we can make our own tools. So let's say I wanted to say update health here, right? Right? Let's say I wanted to update health, and I said, well, we have the player health tracker instance. That's what we named it. And then let's go player's current health plus equals another variable we have here. Let's do test int. Okay. Now, by itself, we can see this has 0 references. It's never being called. We can right click on it. We can go find all references, and it's not ever being called. No references found to this. So if I go into here and we have test int, we're saying plus equals test int in our code. So that means we should see this get added, 5 added to it every frame. So it's going to go very quickly if we were actually calling that function. Right now, it's never being edited. I can change it to whatever I want right here. In order for, I dragged it to the wrong screen. In order for a function to actually happen, you have to call it. Now, if I add this to update, this is how we call a function. You write its name, and you put these little parentheses at the end, okay, with a semicolon. Now, if I were to update its name, or I'm sorry, not update its name. Now that I have it in update, we should see it's just going to keep adding and adding and adding forever. So that's how you call a function. Again, functions could be public, private, all that good stuff. Actually, if I, and it works the exact same way. If I make it public and go to player health tracker, let's say my player health tracker has access to the player controller. I'm going to say player controller instance. I can say player controller instance dot update health because it was public, right? Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to comment this out from our update in here. So we have basically 2 scripts running here. We have our player controller, which has the update health function. And then we have our player health tracker saying, hey, player controller, I'm going to use your update health function because it's public and I have access to you. I can go ahead and do this. The tricky thing is, if we go ahead and hit play right now, I'm thinking we're going to get an error. We are. There we go. It says, hey, I don't have a player controller instance, which is true, right? It doesn't have one here. So let's go ahead and fix that. We could do the get component, or we can just drag it in. And now we should see it immediately start working. Same as it was when it was there before. Now, going to look at this function one more time. It says that it's going to add test int. It's kind of weird for player health tracker to just be trusting that player controller is going to, or let me backtrack. It's not weird, but let's say that we didn't want to use test int. We wanted to use a number that was defined in this script, right? Let's say we go and we say public int player health gain per frame, right? So what could we do here? We can use something called parameters. And if you've used functions like on collision or on trigger, you've already done this once before. We're going to get rid of this. We're going to put the plus equals back. But we're going to put an integer in this parentheses. And we're going to call it health to add. Keep in mind, this is private, right? So you would want this, because it doesn't have a very public or private, you actually can't put one there. But um, because you can't, it defaults to private. So this should be lowercase. This is what we call a parameter rather than a variable. It means in order to call update health, you have to give it a number. So we're going to go health to add, right? So this takes it a little bit out of, we're not using tested anymore. Actually, I'm going to delete these test variables up here just to clean it up. We're saying, hey, when you call update health, you need to tell it how much to add. So if I uncomment here, I'm going to comment in our player health script real quick so we can just focus on this. Just bring this down a bit. You see that I'm getting an error, and it says there's no argument given that corresponds to the required formal parameter health to add, because health to add is required in here. You have to give it something. So I'm just going to say 10. And this means that then update health will run, and it will add 10 every time it runs. So if I go back over to Unity right now, not the internet, we should see it's adding 10 every frame. Now you can see it's going up a little bit faster than it did before, right? Now, this is all cool, but one of the big reasons you do this is because sometimes you have scripts outside of the script that the function's written in trying to do trying to call it and defining their own variable. So for example, if you had two different bad guys that were saying, hey, take away health, they might do different damage, and you might pass in the damage here. So this is a little bit of a goofy example here, but it kind of works the same way, right? If I do update health and I say, hey, I want this health gain per frame, well, now I should see it take, if I make this, I don't know, 50, we should see it skyrocket. We should see it go way up because it's constantly adding 50 per frame. And that's how parameters work, just about. Now, I'm going to clean this up because this is actually really weird. Our player controller, why does it have the update health function? It shouldn't have that. That should be in our player health tracker, thing that actually takes control of our player health. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete that. We're going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit, because one big thing as you're coding is you really want to make sure that your code makes sense. The things that are in one script make sense to be in that script. So for example, having our player health in this doesn't really make sense. Getting a hold of it might, and knowing about it, but actually doing any logic to our health doesn't really make sense for a player controller, right? So let's go ahead and do a couple other things. I'm going to say public void take away health. It's kind of the same deal, right? We're going to go into that example of we're going to go into that example of two different enemies that will do different amounts of damage, right? So we're going to say int health to remove, and then now we have a new public function, right? So we're going to get into some of the big things that Unity has that they offer to us. But I do want you guys to be aware of this being a public method that can be called from anywhere. Let me just update this. So taking it back just a second, you'll see that this is giving me an error, right? This is because this is a private parameter. It only exists in here, okay? So I can't use it in here. Now, if I go ahead and copy this in here, kind of mirrors it, right? Our health to remove is now totally okay to be used here because it exists within this little pocket dimension here. Now, I'm going to go back over to the player controller because something that does make sense in my mind, you might have another script called collision handler or something like that. is for our public on collision enter 2D to be here. And you'll see that it takes a parameter as well. This is just something that Unity gives when a collision happens. Okay? And actually, I'm going to change this to on trigger enter. Or, no, collision's fine. I'm sorry. And we're going to say, well, let's take a step back. We're going to do a little bit more code in here than I thought we were going to. We're going to delete our triangle, and we're going to make a circle, and we're going to make 2 circles. Give them their colliders. You guys should know what these are. Oops, sorry for hitting the mic. Give them their colliders, and you should all know that in order for a collision to happen, you have to have a rigid body on something. So I'm going to add a rigid body 2D to my player. We're going to make gravity 0 just so that we don't float away. And we're going to make these 2 our enemies. So we're going to say red enemy and purple enemy. Okay. So we're going to tag them enemy. So tags are basically simple little ways to identify different types of things. If I click on the red and purple enemy, we know they're both enemies, and we'll have to make a script called enemy. Right? Excellent. Here's our enemy script. Now, we're not going to do anything here, but keep track of public int damage to do. Right? So that way, when we collide with them, they know how much damage they should do. In our on collision enter, I'm going to do a simple if statement. And we're going to, in the next video, get into if statements, but this should be pretty easy logic to follow. We're going to say if the thing that I collided with, we have to go through its transform because the transform has access to the tag, which we just tagged enemy, right? If the thing that our player controller collided with is tagged enemy, then we're going to say, let's get component. We're going to say collision dot get dot transform. Sorry, dot get component enemy. We're going to get its enemy script and get its damage to do. We're going to just make a private variable here called int damage I need to take equals that. Now, we have access to our player health tracker instance, and we can say take oh, did I spell? Hold on. You guys are probably laughing at me. This should be take away health. Take away health. Damage I need to take. Now, this would say if I collide with the enemy, I see the damage I need to take is on the enemy because I went through and got its enemy code. Let me go ahead and tell the player health tracker instance that it needs to take away that much health. You can simplify this and actually say, hey, just do that. Because this is a number, right? You can just put that in there as well. This simplifies it quite a bit. Okay, so you're sending over the damage to do on the enemy to the health instance with the take away health method. So now, real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this update health and do it on start. And we're going to go back over to Unity. And we're going to say that the player should start with, because we know start happens just once. So let's say that they get 2,000 health, because I like big numbers. And let's add the enemy script to our enemies here. And let's say that red enemy, first of all, let's make him red, is going to do 25 damage. And purple enemy is going to first of all become purple, and he's gonna do 100 damage. Purples are always more dangerous. Da, da, da. All right. So now, with the code we've written, we should be able to first of all see that our player's current health has been set to 2,000, and if we collide, oh, collision's not going to work because I'm moving it there. Let's do this. If I do 1, we should see that as it was colliding, it started taking away 50 damage. Okay, now let's make the gravity 0 again. Let's bring our square up. Up. Its rigid body is still going. No! Let's make it... Let's pause. Let's unplay this. And let's make this a... Where's the thing I want? There we go. Kinematic. I think that's what we want. It's trying. This is why I want to do on trigger. Let's go ahead and switch that over to on trigger enter real quick, and we'll just make these guys triggers. On trigger enter. Now the one difference with on trigger enter is I believe it takes a collider 2D instead. Should be all the same otherwise, but it's not liking my spelling. There we go. You'll know it's right when it turns blue. Alright. Just because we don't have any input set up, I don't want to have to have this thing falling all the time. So on trigger enter, when I go in, you'll see that the red took off 25. When I go into the purple, it takes off 100. And then same thing. And I'm seeing that right here. 25, 100, 25, 100. Okay? And that's really what we're going to get into here with the code. I think that's where we're going to wrap this video up. We went over what public and private means. We went over the casing. We went over functions and how they work. A couple of Unity's built-in functions. We saw on trigger enter and on collision enter. There is also on trigger exit 2D, on trigger stay 2D, and same thing with the collision. Basically, when you leave a trigger or when you stop colliding or while you're in there. We went over scripts talking to each other. We also went over the fact that we have all these different variable types, and every time we make a new script, we're making a new variable type. Yeah, I think that's a lot. So I hope this was useful for you. And if you have any questions, please comment down below or send me a message over Discord. Thanks.